He stood in the middle of my living room, fists clenched, voice rising with every word. It's just 20,000. You have that. You said you had money for emergencies. I looked at him, at the grown man who used to wrap his tiny fingers around mine in grocery store parking lots, and said the word I hadn't used often enough with him. No. It came out soft, but solid. His wife, Clarissa, exhaled a sharp laugh from behind him. She was perched on the arm of my couch like a queen without a throne, her manicured fingers scrolling absently through her phone. Diego stepped closer. His jaw twitched. You said you wanted me to enjoy my life. I do, I replied calmly. But that doesn't mean I'll bankroll your fantasy cruise. His eyes narrowed. So what, you're just going to hoard it? Let it rot in the bank while we... His voice cracked. You said family comes first. I've already given, I said, quieter now. Enough. There was a pause. A beat too long. Then came the sound. Sharp. Flat. Flesh on flesh. My head turned from the force of it. The left side of my cheek lit up hot and buzzing. For a moment, the only thing I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator behind me. You ungrateful woman, he spat. Fine. You won't give it. Then look for me. Clarissa didn't flinch. She smiled. He stormed out, keys jangling, door slamming. She stood, smoothed the hem of her designer tunic, and followed. Neither of them looked back. I didn't chase. Didn't call out. My cheek still burned, but it wasn't from the strike anymore. It was from the sudden vacuum of understanding the hollow air left behind when something finally breaks for good. I moved slowly, deliberately, into the bedroom, to the back of the closet. I pulled out my suitcase, blue with a scuffed corner and a sticker from a conference in Reno. Then another. I opened drawers, folded what I needed. Socks, cardigans, the good shoes. The file folder labeled bonds and savings. It didn't feel rushed. It felt overdue. The last thing I packed was the ledger. The old leather-bound one. Not the digital version, not the spreadsheet Clarissa once mocked me for. You're still writing things by hand, but the one with ink-smudged corners and tabbed sections. My quiet record of years of giving, of love, that had been mistaken for endless supply. I set it gently atop the clothes and zipped the bag. By the time the sun peeked over the neighbor's fence the next morning, I was already backing out of the driveway. My car was old, but it still held its own on the highway. The cruise flyer Diego had left on the table was folded and stuffed in the glove compartment. I didn't cry on the drive. Not once. There was no music, no podcast. Just road and wind and the dull hum of a woman finally letting silence speak for her. I didn't have a destination in mind yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't coming back. I didn't bother locking the front door. Let them think I'd be back. Let them wonder or not wonder at all. The porch light was still on, casting long shadows across the dew-covered grass. My car was packed. 2 suitcases in the backseat savings binder on the passenger side, and nothing in the trunk but space. Just in case I didn't return for a long while. I eased onto the road with the headlights dimmed. The neighborhood was still asleep, the windows dark, the sidewalks empty. I'd lived here for nearly 27 years. Raised Diego in this house. Scraped paint from baseboards, patched drywall, replaced shingles after spring storms. Yet as I looked at the place now, at the slanted blinds in the front window, the rosemary bush I'd trimmed just last week, it felt less like home and more like a house someone else would inherit by default. A place they already assumed was theirs. Clarissa had said something last Christmas when she thought I wasn't listening about what to do with Mom's place once she's not driving anymore. They had already placed me on a shelf in their minds, already decided my exit, so I made it easier for them. The roads out of town were still dark. I didn't have a hotel booked, didn't even have a final destination. I just drove east away from the coldness that had settled not only in Diego's voice, but in my bones. It wasn't just the slap. It was the way he said it, the weight of entitlement in every word, every shrug he'd given me in the past year. I'd mistaken dependence for closeness. I'd been funding a relationship that had long since died. I stopped at a 24-hour diner 2 counties over, sat by the window, ordered tea, and watched as daylight filtered through streaked glass. The waitress called me Han and brought a biscuit I didn't ask for. I ate it anyway. The savings binder lay open beside me. I flipped through the tabs, reviewing notes I'd written in blue ink, most of them faded from time. There were dates Diego wouldn't remember, transactions he never knew about, the time I pulled from my retirement to cover his moving expenses, the check I wrote when Clarissa wanted to rebrand her coaching business, the down payment on their house, the extra $200 to cover their IVF attempts, though they'd never sent updates and I never asked. I had documented it all, not to hold it over them, but because I was a numbers person, because facts were the only things that didn't lie to me. I took a pen from my bag and drew a new line across the bottom of the last page. March 4th, exit, 00 gifted, 0.0 owed, then underlined it. By noon, I had checked into a roadside motel 2 towns away, paid in cash. The clerk didn't ask questions. I liked that. Room 6 had a rattling air conditioner and a comforter older than the furniture, but it didn't matter. I wasn't here to rest. I was here to think. I laid the ledger on the small table by the window and unzipped my suitcase. I pulled out a cardigan and my old calculator. Then my eyes landed on the folded flyer sitting on the nightstand, creased at the corners, faintly smudged from the glove compartment where I'd stuffed it days ago. It was the envelope Diego had left on my kitchen counter last week. I hadn't opened it then, but now something made me pause. A line written in Clarissa's handwriting across the bottom. Make this happen. It's the least she can do. I set it down without reacting, then opened my notebook and turned to a blank page. I hadn't meant to read it line by line. At first, I just flipped through the pages, letting my eyes skim the familiar ink strokes and tidy columns. But somewhere between the entries for 2012 and 2015, I slowed down. The numbers weren't just numbers. They were timestamps of love I had mistaken for progress. January 3rd, 2012, 450 for Diego's business license renewal. He was still doing freelance graphic design back then. Said he didn't want to work under anyone. I'd smiled and nodded and paid the fee online after he sent me a screenshot of the application page with the words, "Need a quick boost, Mom." April 8th, 2013. $1,875 for the security deposit on the loft apartment he couldn't afford. He'd just moved in with Clarissa. She said they needed a space that aligned with abundance. That phrase stuck with me like a mosquito bite. I remember handing her the check, and she didn't even say thank you. She just asked if I could also help cover the moving truck. October 2014, $6,000 to pay down his credit card. That one hurt. I found out he'd spent nearly $2,000 on wellness retreats and another $3,000 on a drone he never used. I paid it anyway. He said his score mattered now that they were trying to get approved for a mortgage. I turned the page. June 2016. $22,500 wedding. The venue alone was more than I'd ever spent on anything personal. Clarissa's dress came from a boutique in New York. I remember the phone call, "It's on hold, but they won't keep it past Friday. We need to move." So I moved. I kept turning. December 2017. $2,800 IVF medications. That one I offered before they even asked. They'd been trying for over a year. Clarissa cried on the couch that night, and for a brief moment, I felt like we were a family again. But they never followed up. Never told me if the attempt failed or succeeded. There was no explanation, just silence. And I was too afraid to ask. Too afraid of intruding on something I'd helped pay for. April 2020. $15,000 war startup pivot. That's what they called it. A pivot. Diego said the pandemic had changed the game, that his app idea needed backing now more than ever. I didn't understand half the words he used, but I wrote the check anyway. I was just relieved he called me Mom again on the phone. I stopped at the most recent page. My own handwriting looked tired. January 2023. 250s. 00 Clarissa's digital retreat in Tulum. She said it was an investment in her brand. I never understood what her brand was, but she sent me an Instagram story of her holding a coconut and smiling beside a pool. I watched it 3 times. I ran the numbers again, just to be sure. Total, 187, 420, 38. I leaned back in the stiff motel chair and let the number settle. Nearly $200,000. From a single mother who'd worked 32 years in a beige cubicle with bad lighting and a broken microwave. Every time I thought I'd stopped giving, I had found one more drawer to open, one more way to say, I believe in you. But belief, it seemed, was only expensive when it came from me. I glanced around the room. The chipped paint. The buzzing light above the mirror. The suitcase half unzipped with my folded sweaters stacked like forgotten letters. And still, I had never stayed in a hotel like the ones they frequented. Clarissa had once joked at dinner, "You should try a spa weekend Solyndra. You've got to receive 2, you know." But they never offered it, never arranged one, never even asked if I wanted rest. I pulled the ledger closer and flipped to the back cover. Tucked between the last page and the spine was an old photo. Diego at 10 years old. Arms wrapped around my waist, missing a front tooth. I slid it into the front pocket of my binder. Then I picked up my phone and searched for one name I hadn't spoken in years. I found Alden Beck's contact, still saved in my phone, though I hadn't called him in nearly a decade. I didn't press the dial button. Not yet. Seeing his name was enough for now to remind me of a time I had boundaries. Before Diego began asking for help, and I started confusing guilt with love, I set the phone down and leaned back against the motel headboard, the ledger still open across my lap. The pages told a story, but my memory filled in the spaces numbers couldn't capture. The first car Diego ever had was technically mine. He'd just graduated from college, moved back home for what he called a few transition months, and within 2 weeks, totaled the old Civic I'd gifted him. I didn't yell. I didn't ask how fast he was going. I just gave him my Camry, the one I still made payments on, and started taking the bus to work. He said, "You're the best," and gave me a side hug before driving off with the windows down and the music too loud. That was the last time he hugged me without being asked. The wedding had started small. They were going to elope, just a courthouse ceremony, they said. I remember sitting at my kitchen table writing a check for $2,000 to cover the initial paperwork and flights. It felt loving, generous. Then the guest list grew. Clarissa's parents insisted on a full event. Suddenly there was a vineyard, a catering company, a live jazz band flown in from Philadelphia, and somehow I became the safety net. When I hesitated over one of the invoices, Diego frowned and said, "You've always said you wanted me to have what you never did." I had. I'd said that. But I didn't know I'd meant debt. The down payment on their house still sat like a stone in my stomach. Clarissa called one afternoon with tears in her voice and Zillow tabs open on her laptop. They'd found the one. It had a wraparound porch and a double vanity. She said it would be perfect for raising a family, and if they missed the offer window, it would be gone forever. She put Diego on the line. He didn't beg. He didn't even ask. He just said, "You know we'll pay you back." I wired the money the next morning. 3 months later, I asked gently if there was a timeline for repayment. Diego looked away and said, "Let's not make this about money. You're making it weird." After that, I never asked again. But I kept records, not just of the money, but of the words that stopped coming, the thank yous that dried up, the hugs that became nods, the birthdays that turned into quick phone calls, the Christmas when Clarissa gave me a candle labeled Calm Energy while her mother unwrapped a designer handbag. Even the laughter changed. It used to be warm and shared. But lately, when they laughed, I was always the last to understand the joke, if I understood it at all. They started using words like manifesting and abundance, but only when I wrote the checks. I wasn't blind. I just didn't want to see clearly. Because the truth felt lonelier than the illusion, I closed the binder and reached for my phone again. I didn't know what I was going to say to Alden. But he had been there once years ago when I helped untangle a company's payroll disaster and caught a fraud ring before it bankrupted the business. He used to call me the quiet scalpel. Said I cut clean and never left blood. I pressed call and waited. The call went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I wasn't even sure what I wanted from Alden. Information, maybe. Or just someone to confirm that I hadn't imagined it all. That I wasn't crazy for finally walking away. I set the phone on the nightstand and stood stretching out the stiffness in my back. The motel walls were thin, and the AC unit groaned every time it kicked on, but the silence in that room was louder than anything I'd heard in years. I made tea from the lobby, came back up, and sat on the bed. The cruise brochure was still tucked beside the lamp, mocking me in its glossy splendor. Phrases like immersive experience and luxury for visionaries were scattered across the pages like promises no one intended to keep. I tapped my phone again. The screen lit up with an incoming call. Clarissa. Odd. I hadn't spoken to her directly in days. I hesitated, but answered. At first there was no greeting, just movement, rustling fabric, hurried footsteps, then laughter. Clarissa's voice, sharp and breathless, came through clearly. She didn't know the call had connected. She doesn't get it. Honestly, I think she believes it's about the cruise, like it's just a vacation or something. Another voice in the background, Diego likely muttered something too low to catch. Clarissa kept talking. It's perfect. We get them all in one place, pitch the prototype, make it sound like she's already a backer. I mean, who's going to question it if Solyndra Marent is listed as an angel investor? I didn't move. I barely breathed. Worst case, she never finds out. Best case, she folds and actually gives in. Either way, it builds credibility. The name helps sell the whole vision. There was the soft clink of glass, maybe ice cubes, maybe champagne. Babe? Her voice dropped slightly. You said she still has access to that retirement fund, right? Like 50 grand, untouched Diego. Now clearer. I'm working on it. She's stubborn right now. But if we push the right buttons. I hit end, just like that silence. Not because I was afraid they'd hear me, but because I'd heard enough. They weren't planning a vacation. They were staging a performance. And I was the centerpiece, propped up, used, manipulated to look like legitimacy, like trust, like safety. I wasn't a mother in their eyes. I was a resume booster. I stood up and opened my binder again. Every dollar I had given them. Every sacrifice. Every act of love. And now they were going to take my name, my reputation, and attach it to fraud. I closed the binder and opened my laptop. If they were throwing around terms like angel investor and prototype, there would be a trail. Clarissa was too vain not to post about it. And Diego. He couldn't help bragging if he thought it made him sound like a genius. Within minutes, I found it. A landing page for a revolutionary AI-powered health diagnostic app. The domain was registered to a shell company based out of Delaware address, linked to a UPS mailbox. No real team, listed no product demo. But there it was. Our early backers include Solyndra Marent, known for her strategic investment in scalable platforms. They had already done it. My name was already out there being used as bait. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened a blank page in my notebook and wrote 4 names down. Then I underlined the first one, Alden Beck. There was a moment just over a year ago when I almost sold my wedding ring. I had taken it off years after Malcolm passed. Not out of grief, but practicality. The band had grown too loose, and I was tired of worrying it might slip down a sink drain or into the laundry machine. I tucked it into the bottom drawer of my vanity right beside an old hairbrush and a dried corsage from Diego's high school prom. Then, one cold afternoon, Diego called. They were in a bind, he said. The lease on their apartment had fallen through. A wiring error. A miscommunication. Clarissa had already posted their moving day selfie, so backtracking wasn't an option. They needed to place an offer on a new unit, fast. He didn't say the number, he just said, "It would really help if you could move something around, Mom." I remember sitting on the edge of my bed after that call, the light outside going dim with snow clouds. I opened the vanity drawer and pulled the ring from its box. It caught the weak light with that same soft shimmer I remembered from the day Malcolm slid it onto my finger, his hands shaking. We'd picked it together. Nothing fancy, just strong, durable, platinum, like we hoped we'd be. I closed my fingers around it. Back then, I didn't ask myself if they deserved the money. I didn't weigh past gifts or question their need. My instinct was always the same. Give. Give until the situation settles. Until everyone breathes again. That time, though, I hesitated. I walked to the local jeweler, stood outside the window, and saw the reflection of a woman who looked tired of being the first solution to every crisis. I turned around, went home, and tucked the ring back where it belonged. I never told Diego. Instead, I gave him a check pulled from my modest savings with a note that said, "Only this once." He never acknowledged the note, or the ring that almost disappeared to keep them afloat. That was the first time I felt it, really felt it. That deep, gnawing quiet inside me. The kind that tells you you've been giving too long, too automatically. That maybe what you thought was selflessness had turned into something else entirely. Something brittle. Something people leaned on without ever seeing the cracks. Because I hadn't said no enough. Not when they moved. Not when Clarissa quit her third job to focus on her brand. Not when Diego dropped the nonprofit internship to build something bigger. I had mistaken being reliable for being loved, and now my name was on a fake investor list being used to lure in strangers. A tool, a prop, a backstop. Not a mother, not even a person. I sat at the motel desk that evening, the ledger beside me, and slipped the wedding ring from my pocket. I'd brought it without thinking. Something in me must have known I'd need a reminder of who I used to be, of what kind of love used to exist in my life, the kind that didn't ask for more than I had to give. I slipped the ring on my finger. It didn't fit the way it used to, but it stayed in place. Then I reached for my laptop and opened a new tab. I searched for Alden Beck again, found the consulting firm where he now worked, and clicked the contact form. I didn't use my full name, just enough to get his attention. Subject: fraud. Using my name. I need to talk. SM. He called the next morning. I answered on the third ring. "Hello, Selendra Marent." A man's voice, confident, familiar. "It's Alden." Alden Beck. For a moment, I forgot the air conditioner was buzzing. Forgot I was still in a motel room with a suitcase half packed on the floor. The last time I'd heard that voice, I was sitting in his glass-walled office, cleaning up someone else's $1 million mess. "Alden," I said slowly. "It's been years." "Too many," he replied. "But I saw your name, and I couldn't not reach out. You've come up recently. In a very strange way." I closed my eyes. "You saw the list?" He paused. "I did." His tone changed, not pitying, but sharper now. Professional. A contact of mine forwarded a pitch deck from an investor cruise. "One of the presenters, some startup called Evico Health, is advertising you as a financial backer." That didn't feel right to me. "It's not," I said flatly. "I figured." He hesitated. Are you okay? I didn't answer right away. There wasn't a short version of that. I'm working on it, I said. Alden exhaled. Look, I've got a situation. One of the firms I'm tied to is running a luxury retreat. Next month, private island high-end investors, the whole thing. But we've had issues with ledger discrepancies, and the internal auditor flagged it too late. We need someone discreet, sharp, old school. And you thought of me. I remember what you did in '09 Solyndra. You saved our entire back end from collapsing. That had been one of the hardest projects I ever took. I was younger then, but exhausted. Malcolm was sick. Diego was barely speaking to me, and I spent 10-hour days buried in forged invoices and phantom vendors. I never complained. Just brought back the truth, quiet and clean. What's the job, I asked. He outlined it quickly. 2 weeks full access to their books plus room and board on the resort island during the event. A contract position with a sizable payout. Confidentiality required. Professional detachment expected. I know it's out of the blue, he added, but something tells me this isn't a coincidence. I looked down at my binder. Clarissa and Diego's fake company. My name on that pitch deck. The cruise was part of the same circuit these people swam in the same waters. Can I see the deck? I asked. He sent it before we even ended the call. A few minutes later, it landed in my inbox. I clicked through the slideshow, each slide more insulting than the last. My name centered on a dark background described as a cornerstone early investor, with a background in financial systems. There was even a quote attributed to me praising their vision for transformative health. I hadn't said any of it, but I knew what to do now. I called Alden back before I lost my nerve. I'll take the job, I said, under one condition. Name it. I want access to the cruise event list, the one tied to the pitch decks. He didn't ask why. Done. I hung up and turned to my suitcase. It was time to repack. This time not as a mother escaping her life, but as a woman reclaiming it. The ticket was booked by noon. Round trip to Miami, departing Tuesday. First class courtesy of Alden's firm. The confirmation email addressed it all to S. Kale, my maiden name. I hadn't seen it on official paperwork in over 40 years. Seeing it again was strange, like holding a version of myself I'd put away long ago. A version that didn't wear soft sweaters to blend in or keep quiet during dinners just to keep the peace. That name belonged to a woman who once negotiated a vendor contract so well it got written into a Harvard case study. I stood in the motel bathroom and practiced saying it aloud. Solyndra Kale. I whispered to the mirror. Consultant, internal audit, no affiliations. It didn't sound foreign. It sounded restored. That night I went over the project terms Alden had sent. Clearances, non-disclosure, full digital access to the ledger system, and a penthouse suite at the resort once I arrived. It wasn't just an assignment, it was trust. Not the kind earned by default as a mother, but the kind granted when someone remembered what you could do before you were defined by who you raised. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept playing old conversations. Clarissa calling me sweet, but stuck in the past. Diego rolling his eyes when I asked about his app's business plan. They hadn't seen me in years. Not really. They saw a purse, a pantry, a standby. And now they'd see nothing until I was ready. At the airport, I wore my hair pulled back and a clean button-down shirt. No jewelry, no frills. Just the woman I used to be dressed for work. My boarding pass scanned without a hiccup, and I boarded without a glance behind me. The man in the seat beside me was young, maybe late 20s, and spent the entire flight scribbling notes on a tablet. At one point, he glanced at my open binder and said, "That's a serious-looking spreadsheet." I smiled, flipping a page. "It is." He nodded respectfully and went back to his work. No one asked if I was someone's mother or someone's grandmother. For once, I wasn't reduced to my relationship to someone else. I was just Solyndra Kale with a job to do. When we landed, a black car with tinted windows waited at the curb with my name printed on a tablet. The driver greeted me by title. Ms. Kale, welcome. You'll be taken straight to the resort. The ocean breeze hit as soon as the doors opened. I'd forgotten the smell of salt in the air, the way it settles on skin and makes the world feel bigger. The resort itself rose like a private kingdom, polished marble steps, teak wood terraces, staff who moved like dancers. A manager met me at the lobby entrance. We've prepared your suite and work materials. Your clearance badges and login credentials are already inside. The first group of investors arrives in 2 days. I nodded. No small talk. When I entered the suite, I found a leather folder on the desk. Inside, a full list of presenters. Diego Morent, Clarissa Morent, Evoco Health. They were on the schedule. Friday evening pitch poolside. Live audience recorded segment for global investors. I sat down, opened my laptop, and pulled up the resort's internal finance portal. My fingers moved automatically, as if they'd never stopped doing this kind of work. Behind me, waves crashed against the rocks beyond the glass balcony. I didn't look. I was already inside the system. The investor retreat was everything Diego and Clarissa used to fantasize about. White-tented lounges, coconut cocktails delivered by staff in linen uniforms, and glass-walled meeting rooms nestled between palm trees and plunge pools. The kind of place where no one asked real questions unless they already knew the answers. Everyone smiled, too much, laughed too easily, and shook hands like they'd already agreed to be impressed. It was paradise built on polite performance. I stayed away from the social areas. My badge gave me unrestricted access to the back-end systems, billing presentations, payout forecasts, and most importantly, the pre-screened portfolios uploaded by the companies pitching during the summit. Evoco Health had its own folder. I clicked it open. It was tidy, too tidy. Someone had been coached. There were statements of intent, revenue projections, a partnership roadmap, and investor brochures labeled with phases: Evoco Wellness Phase 1, Evoco Tech Phase 2, Evoco Global Phase 3. I recognized the font. Diego used it on every college project he asked me to proofread. I dug deeper past the PDFs meant for the public. In a subfolder buried in metadata, I found scanned forms of incorporation. Delaware again. Then 2 others, Nevada and the British Virgin Islands. Each with similar names, slight spelling shifts, and vague purposes. He was building ladders. One shell company owning the next, insulating liability behind layers of abstraction. It was clever, dangerous, and he hadn't built it alone. Clarissa's name appeared on 3 of the filings. Not as a co-founder, no, they were smarter than that. She was listed as communications liaison on one and wellness strategy consultant on another. But there it was. The most recent LLC filing, just 4 months old, listed initial investor and financial consultant Celendra Morent. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just a lie. It was a framework. A system designed to hide risk and invite cash. They weren't presenting a business, they were performing legitimacy. And I was the costume. My name didn't open doors. It opened shields. Made other people comfortable enough to open their wallets. After all, if someone's mother was on board, how bad could it be? I scrolled further. Internal memos, digital receipts, marketing drafts. In one Slack thread buried near the bottom, I saw a message from Clarissa to someone on their so-called advisory board. She'll come around. She always folds. He's just got to push the guilt button hard enough. We'll keep her visible through the cruise date. After that, we don't need her. The document was dated 3 weeks ago, before he slapped me, before I walked out, before I found myself on this island, no longer anyone's mother, but still fighting to clean the damage caused by the people I once loved more than my own breath. Alden had warned me, go in quiet. Pull what you need. Don't stir the water until we know how deep it runs. I was beginning to see the bottom, and it was darker than I'd feared. I downloaded copies of everything, backed them to a private cloud account under my maiden name. Then I opened a new spreadsheet and began logging the connections, mapping the flow of money, highlighting the lies. Diego used to scribble stories in the margins of his notebooks. He once told me, "The trick to a good story is making sure everyone forgets the truth halfway through." But this time, I remembered, and I would be the one telling the ending. I found their names on the guest list the same afternoon I finished the financial map. There they were, Diego Morent and Clarissa Morent, listed as VIP presenters. Their bios were short-inflated and meticulously worded. Visionaries in the health tech space, married entrepreneurs bridging wellness, and AI founders of the disruptive startup Evoco. Underneath, in bold Friday evening, poolside keynote pitch plus investor cocktail social, they were headlining. The same people who had erased me from their future were now walking confidently into it, arms linked, backed by my reputation, selling dreams I'd never signed off on. They didn't just assume I wouldn't find out they'd bet on it. They'd structured this entire narrative as if I'd disappeared. I closed the document and stared at the ocean for a long time. It wasn't rage that settled in, not even grief. It was something more still than that. Resolve. I logged out of the portal, slipped my binder into my bag, and walked down the polished stairs to the front desk. The concierge smiled and asked if I needed a dinner reservation. "No," I said. "I'd like to charter a private cabin on the Serenity Line cruise departing Friday morning." He blinked. "That's the investor cruise tied to the retreat, correct?" "I'm aware," I replied. "I'd like a private suite. Top deck. No shared walls." He nodded slowly and tapped at his keyboard. "They're nearly full, but there's one ocean view stateroom left on deck 9. You'll need to book directly with Serenity. I'll pay in cash." He looked up. Of course. It took 2 hours, a short drive to their office off the marina, and one thinly veiled explanation that I was joining late due to business. The woman at the desk didn't ask many questions once she saw the stack of $100 bills. Old money always shuts people up faster than fresh charm. By sundown, I had my boarding pass and my suite key. I returned to the resort, printed 2 copies of the financial trail I'd built, and sealed them in separate envelopes. One would go to Alden if anything went sideways. The other would stay with me, tucked beneath the floorboard of my cruise cabin, until the moment it needed to surface. The next morning, I slipped on a wide-brimmed hat, sunglasses, and a soft blue blouse I hadn't worn in years. Not business casual, not motherly, just clean, sharp, and invisible enough to move through the lobby without raising suspicion. I passed by a table of early cruise boarders sipping smoothies. One of them was Clarissa. She didn't see me. She was too busy laughing at something Diego had just whispered in her ear, one perfectly manicured hand resting on his knee. They looked relaxed, certain. People who thought they'd already won. The ship gleamed in the morning sun, sleek, polished, expensive. Just like the lie they were selling. When I stepped aboard, no one checked for bloodlines. No one asked whose mother I was. They only scanned the barcode, handed me a welcome drink, and pointed toward the elevators. My cabin was near the bow, quiet with thick walls and a sliding door that opened to a private balcony. I placed my things inside. Binder in the drawer. Backup copies in the safe. Documents secured. Then I sat in the upholstered chair by the glass and waited. This time I wasn't here to give. I was here to watch the house they built on my back crack, plank by plank. My name wasn't on any placards, and I liked it that way. The welcome dinner was held on the upper deck beneath linen canopies lit by strings of warm white bulbs. Champagne flutes clinked. Polished shoes tapped on the deck floor. Waitstaff moved like ghosts between candlelit tables, and laughter floated on the sea breeze like everything was perfect. I stood in the far corner, nursing a sparkling water I didn't want watching the theater unfold. Diego and Clarissa had arrived late, fashionably so. They didn't rush. Clarissa wore a backless silver dress and that polished smile of hers that never quite reached her eyes. Diego, in a navy jacket and no tie, scanned the room with the ease of someone who thought he belonged here. They were magnetic in that manufactured way, attractive, well-practiced, effortlessly confident. Investors leaned in when they spoke. I watched Diego rest his hand on Clarissa's back like a stage cue. She tilted her head and laughed like they were sharing something intimate. I'd seen her do the same thing to waiters. They were seated near the front with a handful of early contributors, their names already engraved on the cruise's commemorative brochure. A man in a cream blazer leaned toward them and asked, "How'd you secure someone like Selendra Morant so early?" Clarissa barely blinked. She believed in us from the start. We were so lucky. Diego nodded solemnly. She's a silent type, always has been. Just trusted us to carry the mission forward. The man smiled. That kind of faith's hard to come by. They toasted to it. I sipped my drink. No one looked twice at me. I was just guest 4117, listed under a travel company booking. My credentials, my cabin, my seating preferences, all deliberately buried in generic labels. It was easy to disappear when you'd been trained to be invisible. But hearing my name, my real name, spoken like a brand they had license to use, lit something inside me. Not rage, not even sadness anymore. Just a final kind of clarity. They had no idea I was breathing the same air. I drifted from the deck after dessert unnoticed and returned to my cabin. The night had turned cooler, and the moon hung low over the black water, quiet and enormous. I sat down at the small desk, opened my laptop, and reviewed the presentation files loaded for tomorrow's pitch. I already knew the script. I'd written better ones myself decades ago. But I wasn't here to fix anything this time, just to let it fail. All I needed to do now was wait, just long enough to see the first cracks, just long enough to let the wrong people ask the right questions, and then I'd give them answers. Real ones, complete, unforgiving, the kind no pitch deck can survive. I met him in the lounge near the lower deck. Young, maybe 22. His uniform said technical support, but the weary sharpness in his eyes told me he handled more than broken microphones. He was adjusting a light fixture behind the stage when I asked if he had a moment. "Depends," he said, without looking up. "I have a request," I said calmly. "It's not complicated, and I'll pay in advance." That made him look at me. I handed him a small envelope, just enough visible to show the prepaid card inside. "I need you to make sure a recording is saved during the pitch tomorrow night." He raised an eyebrow. "The whole event's recorded by default." "Yes," I said, "but I need everything said at table 9, direct audio. Not just the presentation. The table conversations, casual talk, off-script remarks." He hesitated. "That's not exactly in my job description. It doesn't have to be in writing." I paused. "You'll find a portable mic in the tech booth's drawer. You know the one I'm talking about. Just set it on the underside of table 9. Taped, if you must." He didn't respond right away. Just studied me like he was trying to decide if I was worth the trouble. "Is this for legal stuff?" he asked finally. "It's for the truth," I said. His gaze lingered for a beat too long. Then he slowly nodded. "You'll have the file before sunrise." He took the envelope. I didn't need to say thank you. We both understood the terms. I left the lounge without another word. Back in my cabin, I opened my notebook and flipped to the page I'd marked the night before. It wasn't a ledger this time, just a simple list of facts. False attribution of investor identity. Fabricated seed round numbers. Undisclosed shell companies. Misuse of another person's financial reputation. All documented. All tied to the same names? I slid the page into a separate folder labeled Playback. If things went according to plan, the pitch tomorrow would be the final nail. Their words, not mine. Their lies in their voices. It wouldn't come from me, not directly. But it would be me pulling the thread. And when the thread finally snapped, I'd be ready to walk across the stage they built with my name, only this time they'd have to say it with their eyes lowered. The cocktail party was invitation only. Black ties, gold accents, fluted glasses. The kind of space where deals were whispered and lies became currency. I wasn't on the guest list, but I didn't need to be. I had watched enough of these evenings from the back of conference rooms in my old life to know exactly how to blend in. All I needed was posture and silence. I circled the edge of the event slowly, pretending to admire the hors d'oeuvres until I spotted them. Table 9. The one closest to the balcony. Diego was already half a drink in one hand, waving a glass while the other rested lightly on Clarissa's bare shoulder. He was in his element, talking louder than necessary, inserting laughter where none belonged, trying to be the man he thought powerful people wanted to see. I edged closer. Close enough to hear, but not enough to be noticed. She finally cracked, he was saying to a man in a velvet jacket. Middle of the night, bags packed left without a word, like some soap opera meltdown. The man chuckled. Your mom? Diego smirked. Yeah. The old woman lost it. Years of pressure, I guess. We'd been carrying her for a while, letting her feel important. You know. Clarissa laughed softly. She thought she was in charge because she paid for things. Bless her heart. My heart didn't move. She's done now. Diego continued, topping off his glass. Totally off-grid. Probably in some motel in a town no one's heard of. She won't bounce back from this. She doesn't know how. There it was. My funeral delivered over a tray of crab puffs and champagne. And yet there I stood 5 feet away, still breathing, still standing straighter than either of them. They didn't see me. I wasn't real to them anymore. Just a discarded plot device a character removed to clear the stage. I didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Instead, I turned away and made my way to the lower deck. The file would be waiting for me soon. But before that, I had something else to do. Something final. Something public. The ballroom shimmered. Spotlights danced over sleek posters branded coasters and smiling hosts who moved with the confidence of people selling success. Rows of chairs filled with well-heeled investors, men in linen suits, women with sharp eyes and sharper portfolios. The final pitch night was the crown jewel of the cruise, and Evoco was set to close it. I arrived early unnoticed. The assistant same boy from the lower deck was already seated behind the tech table. He looked up, once gave the barest nod, and tapped twice on the console in front of him. I stepped back into the shadows near the draped curtain at stage right. Across the room, Diego adjusted the cuffs of his jacket. Clarissa checked her reflection in the polished surface of a wine chiller. They were ready to sell their fantasy, but I'd brought the truth. The event host took the mic with his signature flair. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. Up next are closing innovators of the evening, the minds behind Evoco Health. Let's welcome Diego and Clarissa Morant. Applause swelled. Spotlights turned. They walked to center stage radiant in their practiced ease. Diego launched into his opening. Evoco began not as a company, but as a conversation. I barely listened, because I knew what came next. At the tech table, the assistant reached beneath the console and slid in the USB. Then he pressed play. Not on the presentation, but on the file I'd labeled Table 9 MP4. The audio poured from the speakers. Crystal clear low hum of conversation behind it, and then Diego's voice. She finally cracked. Middle of the night, bags packed left without a word. Silence fell over the ballroom. Then came Clarissa's laugh, light, sharp, familiar. She thought she was in charge because she paid for things. Bless her heart. The room stilled. Someone gasped. An older woman in the second row lowered her glass without drinking. And then Diego, again. She's done now, totally off-grid. Probably in some motel in a town no one's heard of. She won't bounce back from this. She doesn't know how. I stepped forward, not onto the stage, not into the light. Just enough for people to turn. Clarissa saw me first. She froze. Lips parted. Diego looked up, and I watched the color drain from his face. Recognition came slow, and then fast, like a sudden slap of cold water. The host stammered, unsure whether to intervene. The file kept playing, bragging, laughter. Words meant for shadows now burning under lights. The truth had no frills. It didn't need them. It spoke in his voice, in her tone, and in the silence that followed. When the clip finally ended, the assistant didn't look up. He simply ejected the drive, pocketed it, and sat back with folded hands. I didn't speak. Not yet. There was one more piece left to move, and I was already walking toward it. The silence was weightless, heavy in its restraint. Eyes turned like a tide, all of them following Diego's shifting stance. Clarissa had frozen completely, lips parted, a pearl of sweat glistening at her temple. The screen behind them flickered to black. And then came his voice again, only this time live. "That's my mother," Diego said. His tone cracked with a forced smile, but the edge was already there, trembling beneath the surface. He stepped slightly toward me, arms out as if to welcome me into some joke we were all in on. She doesn't understand the context. This was a private moment taken out of, I didn't let him finish. I took one step forward, then another. No microphone, no lights, just me in flats and a white blouse, the woman he'd counted on staying quiet. I was his mother, I said, my voice steady. Now I'm just his lesson. Gasps passed like a ripple through the crowd. No one clapped. No one smiled. Diego's mouth opened, then closed. Clarissa blinked hard, looking toward the exit like she was already preparing to vanish. I kept going, not with a speech, but with facts. The companies listed on your pitch. 3 are shells. 1 is registered under my name without my consent. The documents were downloaded by me, reviewed by me, and shared with the firm that invited me here. Murmurs rose behind me. Shifts in posture. Some investors pulling out their phones. I was your first funder. Yes, I continued. I funded your college, your wedding, your first car, and your down payment. You used that pattern to sell strangers on your story. But that story is ending now. Diego's face was red. His eyes darted to the crowd, searching for sympathy. He found none. You think you're doing this for legacy, I said. But legacy built on fraud is just a liability with a delayed fuse. Clarissa tried to speak, but a woman in the front row raised a hand, silencing her with a simple glare. I am not here to destroy you, I said, softer now. You've done that yourself. I'm just here to make sure you don't take anyone else down with you. Security didn't have to be called. They were already there 3 steps from the edge of the stage. The host whispered something into his headset. A few seconds later, the lights dimmed, not ceremoniously, but decisively. The event was over. I turned and walked back down the aisle. No one stopped me. No one called after me. At the exit, one man, gray-haired, expensive shoes, touched my elbow. Gently. Was everything you said true? He asked. I met his gaze. Everything. He nodded once. Then I'd like to speak with you again. When the dust clears. I gave him a small nod and stepped into the corridor, the noise fading behind me like a bad memory, finally walking into the dark. By the time I reached my cabin, the emails had started. First came the confirmation from the investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Your submission has been received and logged for urgent review. Then a message from the bank's fraud division accounts tied to Evico Holdings and Clarimar Wellness LLC had been flagged and frozen pending legal inquiry. Another from Alden, you were right to act when you did. Quiet storms do the most damage. I sat down on the edge of the bed and exhaled. It wasn't relief I felt, just motion finally settling. The folder I'd uploaded timestamps, filings, audio forged signatory records had been enough. I hadn't needed to testify or beg or plead. I'd just documented what they'd built and let their own words do the rest. By sunrise, the group chat I'd monitored through a back-end link was filled with panic. Funds are locked. Why Clarissa the investor wire bounced. What's going on, Diego? I need you to call me now. I didn't reply. They'd used my name to get approval, and now my name had stopped them. Not with drama, not with screaming, but with silence and paperwork. The cruise ship was scheduled to dock in Miami that afternoon, but Evico wouldn't be stepping off as darlings of the investor world. There would be no second round, no celebratory cocktails, no post-event press buzz, just subpoenas, clawbacks, and closed accounts. I hadn't asked for an apology. I didn't need one. Apologies don't unfund years of taking. They don't fix what was broken in the moment a son decides a slap is a small price for leverage. Diego didn't know yet that the condo title had been quietly returned to my name weeks before I left. He thought I gave it to them free and clear, just like he thought the family trust had been emptied for his growth vision. He never noticed the conditions I'd written into the documents. Clarissa had signed them without reading. The trust had a clause. Any funds transferred under coercion or false representation shall be retroactively reversed and placed in escrow managed solely by the founder or her legal proxy, me. All that remained was the hollow shape of their ambition. And it would take them years to understand how quickly empty things collapse in daylight. I knew he'd be waiting. The lobby was quieter than usual that morning, the hum of returning passengers replaced by the kind of silence that follows embarrassment. Crew members avoided eye contact. A few guests whispered near the coffee bar. The reputation Diego had carried aboard, polished, important, untouchable, was unraveling one rumor at a time. I stepped off the elevator, rolling my suitcase behind me. My stride was measured, not fast. I didn't need to run anymore. He was there, Diego. Slouched on the low lobby bench, hands dangling between his knees, eyes scanning the corridor like a boy outside the principal's office. When he spotted me, he stood too quickly, knocking a newspaper off the seat beside him. He bent to pick it up, fumbling like he didn't know what to do with his hands. His tie was gone. His collar wrinkled. The show was over. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, talk to me." I didn't stop walking, not out of cruelty, but because I had nothing left to explain. "Mom," he started again, stepping in line with me, his voice rising with desperation. "I get it, okay. I messed up. I panicked. I didn't know they'd freeze everything that fast." Still, I kept moving. He followed me toward the gangway, matching my pace now. "I just look. You raised me better than this." "I know. And I know what I said on the recording. I didn't mean it like that. I was trying to impress a guy who's worth 50 million. I was talking out of my..." I stopped, turned, looked at him. "You slapped me," I said, voice low. "You sold a fantasy using my name. You built a future where I didn't exist because you thought I wouldn't notice. Or worse, you thought I wouldn't matter." His mouth opened, then shut again. "You didn't just lie," I continued. "You practiced erasure. And you were good at it until someone reminded you I still had a voice." His eyes glistened. "Can we just talk?" I shook my head. "There's nothing I could say now that you would have heard back then." I adjusted the strap of my bag, turned, and walked down the ramp. Behind me, I heard no footsteps. Only the faint hum of the ship's engine still running even after everything stopped. The air felt different in Erie. Crisper. A little saltier from the lake, a little quieter than I remembered. But maybe I was the one who'd changed. Finally tuned to a frequency that didn't beg for chaos. The condo sat at the edge of the shoreline, tucked between two weathered townhomes with flower boxes and faded wind chimes. It wasn't grand. Not the kind of place someone would call aspirational, but it was mine. In my name. No cosigners. No compromises. The closing process had been smooth. I wired the payment from my own account, one that bore only my name, Celendra Kale. No Marant. No ghost of what I'd been reduced to. I moved in with just 3 suitcases and a box of old books. No heirlooms, no framed photos, no echo of people who once believed my worth began and ended at the bottom of my wallet. The first week I bought a used easel from a retired art teacher across town. She sold it cheap, threw in a small set of brushes and half-dried tubes of oil paint she no longer had the hands for. I thanked her and drove it home in my trunk. I hadn't painted in years. Not since my mother passed and left behind a canvas. She never finished just 3 blue brush strokes and a penciled outline of a pine tree. I found it once while cleaning her attic and had stuffed it in my closet without thinking. Now I wished I'd brought it, but I didn't need a template. Not anymore. The first morning I opened the windows wide, let the lake breeze in, and painted whatever came to mind. A red umbrella, a sliver of dock, a woman's back turned toward the horizon. It didn't need to be beautiful. It just needed to be mine. There were no calls, no messages. The noise had faded. Even the silence felt new. I made coffee in the mornings, walked to the local market for fruit, waved at neighbors who didn't ask my story. I wasn't hiding. I was simply beginning. Somewhere in that quiet, I started humming again. Softly. Like I used to before long nights filled with spreadsheets and guilt-laced transfers. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was building slowly, quietly, entirely from scratch. I didn't write his name again. Not in my journals, not on any forms, not even when I filled out the emergency contact paperwork for the condo association. I left that line blank. Not because there was no one to list, but because I didn't owe the world a placeholder for someone who'd erased me long before I walked away. There was power in omission. At first, I thought I might grieve the absence, but days passed, and I didn't. Not in the way I expected. What I felt instead was space. Like my mind had been a cluttered attic, and someone had finally opened the window. The leather ledger I once used to track every loan, every birthday check, every late-night transfer they used to call it Mom's Bible still sat on my bookshelf, but it looked different now. Smaller somehow, more honest. I pulled it out one evening after painting my hands, still speckled with cobalt and ochre. I turned through the pages, the entries neat and dated. 2012. Down payment duplex, $18,000. 2015, Clarissa's school final term, 9 to 200. 2018, medical coverage shortfall, 1560. I ran my fingers over the ink, each line a version of myself, quiet, dependable, hopeful. But something in me needed more than record-keeping now. So I flipped to a clean page. At the top, I wrote what I kept for me, and beneath that, in a new column, I began. May, first morning without obligation. June, lake breeze through my bedroom window. July, oil paints that stained the cuff of my sweater. August, laughter mine surprising and sudden in aisle 3 of the market. I wrote without calculation. No dollar signs. No justification. Just moments. There was no category for this in the old version of me. No way to tabulate healing. But here now, I didn't need permission to start a new kind of accounting. When I closed the book that night, I didn't tuck it away in a drawer. I left it on the table, open to that page. Because peace, I'd learned, wasn't the absence of pain. It was the presence of self, uninterrupted, unbought, and finally unapologetic. It took me 3 weeks to decide. Not because I was torn, but because I wanted it done with intention. Every transfer I'd made before had been reactive, urgent wires, guilt-touched deposits, fixes for someone else's mess. This one was different. It came without shame, without fear, without asking anyone first. I sat at the desk in my condo, the lake quietly rippling outside, and logged into my account. The balance blinked back at me more than I needed, more than I would spend. I had always lived simply never out of scarcity, but out of choice. And now, after everything, I had something left to give that wouldn't disappear in someone else's name. I opened the site for the North Country Women's Fund, a small nonprofit, under-publicized but real. They offered scholarships to single mothers who had left abusive households or family structures that tried to cage them. Women rebuilding from ash. Women who didn't need pity, just space and a shot of momentum. I filled in the form. Under donor message, I typed, "For the women who were told they were too much, too loud, too soft, too stubborn, too tired, and loved anyway." I hit submit. The confirmation loaded slowly. I waited. Then came the email. "Thank you for your gift. Your donation will fund 3 full scholarships, including housing stipends for the coming academic year." I exhaled through my nose. A quiet laugh curled in my chest, something soft and whole. Later that day, I walked into town. I didn't need anything, not really. I just wanted to move, to be a body in motion, not just a memory standing still. I passed a small jewelry shop tucked between a bookstore and a cafe. The window display caught my eye rings glimmering under soft lights. Velvet stands beneath them. Couples inside leaned over counters. Salespeople whispered about clarity and cut and lifetime guarantees. I looked down at my hand. The ring was still there. The same one I almost pawned years ago when Diego had needed just a little more for the movers, and I hadn't yet learned to say no. I'd slipped it off. In the car, sat in the lot for 20 minutes. And then quietly, I'd put it back on. It stayed with me through every withdrawal, every betrayal, and now it stayed not as a memory of who I'd been for others, but as a symbol of what I'd finally kept for myself. I passed the window without slowing. No glancing back. No ache in my chest. If the phone rang that moment, if Diego's voice cut through the air, I'm not sure I'd recognize it. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I'd rewritten the version of me who always listened. I had nothing left to give him. And for once, I wasn't sorry.